Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast for agency owners, hosted by agency veteran and coach Steve Guberman. Agency Bytes is a podcast focused on delivering actionable agency information from agency experts in about 25 minutes. Why 25 minutes? Because who has the attention span for much more these days? And you can squeeze in a listen between meetings with time for a bathroom break or coffee refill before your next meeting.
Welcome to Agency Bytes, a podcast dedicated to helping creative entrepreneurs thrive. I'm Steve Guberman from Agency Outsight, where I coach agency owners to build the business of their dreams. Today, my guest really needs no introduction, but I'll read through the short one anyway. Blair Enns is the founder of Win Without Pitching, the author of 3 books, including his latest, The 4 Conversations, a new model for selling expertise. Blair helps creative professionals and expert advisors worldwide win more business at higher prices without giving away their work for free. He's also the co-host of the popular Two Bobs podcast, exploring the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker. Blair, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Steve. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I've followed Win Without Pitching for, maybe 15-ish years. Prior to that, you've got agency experience. What was like that catalyst that said, I'm going to jump into consulting?
The catalyst was really I wanted to move to this little village, remote mountain village in British Columbia, Canada, where I currently live, and I needed to find a way to earn a living. So it was really driven by a lifestyle choice, yeah.
I love that you put lifestyle first and said, I'm going to build a business that's going to support that. The agency wasn't going to do it from the little village, I guess.
Yeah, I was working for one of the large brand name multinational agencies at the time. Actually, I had been fired from that job, and I was working for a smaller Canadian agency. But I said to the owner, I'll come work for you for a year, and then I'm moving to the woods. Because the experience with the multinational, the second one that I worked for, it wasn't great. So my wife and I decided to take this leap. And then I went to work for a firm for 12 months, which turned into 20 months, which restored my faith in the profession of advertising because I'd fallen out of love with the business. And I had a client in this last agency, and he and I were having a goodbye lunch. And I told him I'm moving this village in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't know what I was going to do for a living. I had a vague idea of a consulting practice. And he said, I have the same dream. He said, one day I want to be able to just tell the world to go to hell. I want to have enough money to be able to tell the world to go to hell. This man owned 4 Ferraris.
He didn't have enough yet.
And it struck me in that moment that I was willing to be poor to be happy. Yeah. And I had more freedom than this very rich, wealthy individual who didn't have enough money to tell the world to go to hell yet. Now, I'm no longer willing to be poor to be happy. And I hope I'm never put in that place where I have to make that choice again. But in the moment, it was just so liberating. I was just unhappy generally with where we were in life. And, I didn't care how I was going to earn a living, but it all worked out.
What a freeing opportunity or freeing experience to just be kind of at that point where that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is happiness. And like I said, we'll figure the rest out. But also I don't need to be poor for that to equal happiness. But if that's what it comes to, then happiness comes first. Yeah,
I thought I was willing to pump gas in the local gas station here to get here.
Yeah.
And it didn't come to that, but I was, and that's not an exaggeration. I was willing to do that. I wanted to be here with my young family in this beautiful place in the middle of nowhere. And it might be the best move we've ever made.
Love that. And that's been 20 something years now?
Yeah, 23, 24.
And then at what point did writing Win Without Pitching come out and that turned into a coaching practice?
Well, when I moved here, I was having another goodbye lunch, with the owner of the agency I worked for. And he said, well, what are you going to do from this place in the middle of nowhere? And I said, maybe I'll build furniture, which is, if anybody who really knows me would laugh at that. Like my father's, if he listened to this, he'd laugh his ass off. Maybe I'll build furniture. Maybe I'll start a consulting practice. I had a few vague ideas about consulting. And he said, well, why don't you keep working? Why don't you do new business development for me remotely? So this is in 2000. Why don't you do it remotely? And so I did that for about a year while I was launching the consulting practice. And to launch the consulting practice, I wrote I wrote down everything that I knew, along with a co-author and a woman who was effectively my business partner. I licensed some material from her for a little while. And we self-published this book, and I just called it Win Without Pitching. It wasn't the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. It was a big, thick binder that contained everything that I knew. And I sold it for $1,000 a copy. So that was another lesson. When I just started writing out, codifying my knowledge. And then I realized, this is a book. I should sell the book. And then I thought, well, books go for $20 to $30. That would be ridiculous. So I priced it at $995, and I started selling the book, and from that, selling consulting engagements. And that was in 2002. Mm-hmm. And then the beginning of 2002. And then I published what I consider to be my first book, The Win Without Pitching Manifesto, in 2010. So that was 8 years later. What was the impetus for that book? I felt like I should have a proper book, not just kind of a system in the package of a book that would go out into the world and give me some credibility as an author.
And so for those who are not familiar, maybe there's one or two listeners that are living under a rock, not familiar with the Win Without Pitching Mindset Manifesto, what's the kind of top level brief understanding there that you really push for?
Well, it started out as a blog post titled 12 Proclamations for a New Year. And I forget what year, probably 2008, January of 2008, where I was I've always loved manifestos, and I've liked the aphoristic writing style of Confucius and Nietzsche. So I wanted to write up like a big, bold book about like bold proclamations or idioms, like it just. And so I wrote this blog post in this experimental tone: we shall, we will, third person plural. And I was more nervous publishing that post than anything I'd published previously, just because the tone, it was a little grandiose. But I was really feeling it, and the proclamations really just came to me, and I got more feedback on that post than anything I'd written. And so a year or so later, I'm thinking, okay, I really have to get a book out there. And I'd been thinking that for a while, and I felt a lot of pressure to publish a book, because I think anybody who's an entrepreneur in the knowledge, some sort of knowledge worker, you feel some sort of pressure to write a book, especially if you see yourself as a writer, as I do. But I didn't want to publish like a book of lists, like here's everything you need to do. And then it occurred to me to blow up that blog post of 12 proclamations into a book. So that turned into a 24,000 word book, which isn't very long. And I think that's part of the appeal. Because I didn't know how to write a book, and I actually figured out what physical size I wanted the book to be. I took a book of the right thickness, and I actually physically cut it down. And I said, okay, the book needs to be this size. And then I wrote to that length. And I mean, it just strikes me as so odd. But I kind of wish I'd done that again in my most recent book. It was so naive, but it was so the right thing to do. And so that book came out in July of 2010. So it's been out we're coming up on 15 years. And it's got a niche audience. I wrote that thinking of a solo designer. And obviously the market is bigger than the target. So I knew it would have a wider audience. But 15 years later, it sold 100,000 copies, and it keeps going. So I'm pretty happy. I see that almost like a child, like it's its own thing. I know I gave birth to it, but it really is its own thing. And I'm proud of it. It is doing well.
Yeah, I know creative professionals, of all sizes, solopreneurs up to, 20, 30 person agencies, and maybe even larger, who kind of adopt, part or parcel of it into their pitching process, their sales process, their pricing process, things like that. So, I guess it has a life of its own and fits all sizes.
Yeah.
Intentional
again, I'm
or not.
really happy with it. Yeah.
And so the latest book, the 4 conversations, kind of walk through and the 4 conversations, a new model for selling expertise. How does that differ from kind of traditional sales approaches? Walk through what the concept behind that is.
Yeah, so I really see it as the here's how to follow up to the Manifesto. And in between these two books, in January of 2008, I published Pricing Creativity, A Guide to Profit Beyond the Billable Hour. And that was in a manual form. And you can still buy that at pricingcreativity.com. And it's an expensive book, different options priced at $100, $200, and roughly $300, depending on the format you want. But pricing is such a high ROI topic. Mm-hmm. I've just heard so many stories from people who've returned many, many, many multiples of the investment in that book. But when it came to, so the Manifesto is a yes, you can book. Pricing Creativity is a here's how to book specifically on the subject of pricing. Mm-hmm. And the 4 Conversations, again, is kind of the here's how to follow up to the Manifesto. So it's the same third person plural voice as the Manifesto. And it does have a lot of principles in it that are manifesto-ish, but it is mostly a framework book. It's how to take these principles, these lofty ideals, and how do you translate that into the way you show up in the sale, the tools you use, what are you looking to accomplish in the sale. And so it's a model book, meaning our model. This book, The 4 Conversations, is effectively what we teach in our training program. Mm-hmm. And so our model is we view the sale as a series of 4 linear and discrete conversations. So at any point in the sale, you simply stop and ask yourself, what conversation is this? Number 1. Number 2, what is my objective in this conversation? And number 3, what framework do I use to navigate to that objective? So that's it in a nutshell. It's frameworks and principles being the ideas that you embody as you use a conversation's framework to navigate to its objective. And the subtitle is A New Model for Selling Expertise. And I believe that those who are expert advisors or practitioners, so you take my traditional creative audience, that is broadened out as we have heard and trained organizations in consulting, accounting, financial planning, engineering, etc., all of these other professions. Our audience, and when I was writing the book, I broadened out the audience, the target that I was thinking about, and the examples that I use. Excuse me. I broadened that out to basically expert advisors and practitioners, people who are experts first and salespeople second. So you fall in love with whatever your business is, you're an advisor or a practitioner of some kind. And then you go to work to do that, to do that first job. And then you find out, oh, there's this other job you have. And if you want to do the job you love, you actually have to learn how to do this other job. And it's called sales. Yeah. So I really wrote this book for the people who see themselves as experts first and never signed up, never got into this because they love selling. And it's a model for how you just let the expert you show up, and you don't try to be the salesperson that you're not.
Is there, thinking about like the mind and most common personality of a creative professional, is there one of these conversations that is more challenging for somebody in the creative industry to embrace, that you think?
That's a good question. I think of the 4 conversations, the one that would be most common to most selling systems would be the qualifying conversation. So it's the vetting conversation. So that one's the most similar, and it kind of feels like a prototypical sales conversation, but it depends on the principles that you're embodying as you're navigating that conversation. The other 3 are different. The first one, the probative conversation, we call it a conversation, but it's really a conversation that happens without you present. It is a function of your business's strategy, your positioning, and how you go about lead generation. So it's a whole lot of decision-making, effort, and time wrapped up in this construct of a conversation. And the conversation is effectively the conversation that a prospective client has with you via your reputation. So we have to look at all of these elements of the reputation, the decisions you make around shaping the business, the decisions you make around communicating the business and positioning the business, the decisions you make around proving your expertise in the public domain in an effort to drive inbound inquiries, So there's a lot of work, and it's the most different.
So it's kind of what they're saying without you even being part of the conversation. It's the conversation that's going on because somebody made a recommendation or they read something on your website, and it's what they're saying about you or the service you provide or the results you get before you even engage one-on-one.
Yeah, I would have the listener imagine two different scenarios. So two different inquiries come in via your website. And you get on the phone or on the Zoom call with the first one and you say, hey, thanks for thinking of how did you hear about us? And they say, well, we Googled ad agency Houston and you came up 9th. And you think, oh, okay. I am one in a sea of many. So in my parlance, you're seen as a vendor, not the expert. Mm-hmm. You have very little power in the buy-sell relationship. As I say in the manifesto, the source of the client's power is the availability of substitutes. So they're looking for a generalist service provider, and you showed up in a list of 10. And if they don't hire you, that's fine because there are 9 others just like you. And
that's just on page 1.
90 or 900.
Yeah.
Right. And then think of a second scenario. You get on the Zoom call and you say, how did you hear about us? And they say, oh, your very best client who I look up to cannot stop talking about you. And she said, you have to use these guys. So I just reached out. Now you are seen as the expert. You're in the power position in the relationship. And your job as you navigate through the sale is to not give that up, to not do needy vendor things that would see you relegated from the position of expert to the position of vendor. And so that, accomplishing that objective, that's what we're trying to accomplish. And that is the objective of the probative conversation, to move in the mind of the client from the position of a vendor to the expert. And then with that, you can just imagine how the power dynamics are different. Right. In the latter scenario, you're free to say to the client in the sale, all right, here's what happens next. Here's what we do next. And in the former scenario, the client is dictating the terms of the sale to you. So, And I'm fond of saying the sale is the sample. It's the sample of the engagement to follow. The client tries on in the sale what it would be like to work with you in the engagement. And the roles each party will play are established in the sale too. And specifically, we make the generalization that there are only 2 roles you can play, either a vendor or the expert.
Interesting. A vendor, one amongst many, the expert, the only option really available. Gives you all of the leverage. Yeah. So the way that you brought out the Win Without Manifest, Win Without pitching with workshops, trainings, things like that, are you doing that with this book as well?
Well, this book is really the workshop in a book.
Okay.
It's the book. So, and I know lots of training businesses like ours have grappled with the question, should I really put the whole system in a book? And the case for putting the whole system in the book is when people, this will sell many thousands of copies, and many people will read the book and be able to implement. Whereas the Win Without Pitching Manifesto is short on implementation. But if they do want training, then in the training, we can spend less time downloading information and more time just practicing the conversations and coaching them on those conversations.
Love that. All these years, you've helped, thousands of agencies probably, help them command better fees, close deals better, be perceived as experts, tighten up their pitching process. What are some of the lessons that have surprised you the most?
Well, the lessons that I've learned that has surprised me.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, it was all about positioning. And I had to bang, and other advisors like Tim Williams and David Baker and a few others, we were banging the positioning drum. And it was a fight in the beginning. And that fight's been over for over a decade. So everybody understands the rationale for narrowing your focus. Not everybody does it, but they understand the rationale for it. And if they choose not to do it, they go into that with their eyes open. They know it's a trade-off, and that the more broadly positioned you are, the more pressure you're putting on your sales skills. So that's not new. I think, pricing in the last 10 years, I wrote Pricing Creativity in 2008, and it takes me years to write a book, and as more time goes by, it takes me longer. But when I started writing that book about 4 years before, I realized I knew nothing about pricing. I knew nothing about pricing and value creation. So I read the canon of literature on pricing, which takes you down all kinds of rabbit holes. And after that, so today I sit here and I think pricing is the lowest hanging fruit on the profit tree. And I did not know that 12 years ago. But if the lesson that I've learned as kind of an advisor would be what's called the curse of knowledge. So I've been teaching some things for 20 years now. So if I tell you something in a training scenario, Steve, I now assume that you have that knowledge, and that I largely assume that you understand it to the degree that I understand it. And it's taken me a long time to understand the value of repetition. Like our coaches, they go through our training program multiple times. And with every pass, even after the fifth, sixth, and then now they're delivering it. And with every pass, they come back and say, wow, I learned so much.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you've been through this thing multiple times. And so I think the lesson is the value of repetition. I don't like writing about topics I've written about before. I'm trying to force myself to be a little bit more repetitive. And my team will say, oh, you wrote about that 12 years ago. And I have to say, I don't care if I wrote about it last year. I need to keep harping on some of the same things. So yeah, the curse of knowledge. I think that once I tell you once, I think you have it. And I just have to remind myself, repetition.
I think there's a lot to that in yes, repetition, but also in the act of implementation. And having not gone through one of your courses, I don't know if that's a piece of it, a section or whatever. But I think when we learn something, then there needs to be a time where I go ahead and bring it into my agency or bring it into my home life or my personal life or whatever. And now I'm living this thing that I'm learning about and then revisiting it. And so to your point, talking about it is one thing, but actually implementing it and seeing how it's going to work, living and breathing in the practice is, I think, a whole other level.
Yeah. And, people often say practice makes perfect. The actual practice doesn't make perfect. Coached practice makes perfect. We just launched after over 20 years. We just launched this, what we call the Win Without Pitching Academy. It's after you go through training, and it's still in beta, but after you go through training, you go into our academy where there's all the training material that you went through and a whole bunch of resources, including a forum with hundreds of other people who've been trained on the system and access to coaches and all these things. And it's free for the life of people who've been through training. And I'm really proud of it, but I'm embarrassed that it's been this long. I'm embarrassed at how poorly we have supported our clients post-training, because training is just the beginning. And then I've had so many conversations with people who say, oh, yeah, we do Win Without Pitching. And I'll ask them what that means. Or they'll preface that and then ask a question that communicates that they're doing something, but it isn't Win Without Pitching compliant something. They're doing something entirely different. So the Academy is a really good resource to offer feedback and to help kind of coach people as they're practicing and give them the resources they need. But I think you can hear the chuckle in my voice. I smile at people who've, again, this is the curse of knowledge. They've implemented some stuff and maybe wildly different. Like I had a client in 2005, I think. And a couple of years after, I worked with her firm for a little while, and then 2, 3, 4 years later, we were having a conversation, and she said to me, "You'd be really proud of me. We received an RFP from a Fortune 500 company, and we said, no, we don't respond to RFPs." And I said, "Great, I am proud of you. What happened after that?" She said, "They went away, nothing." And I went, "Oh my God, what have I done?"
Yeah. I'll work with agencies.
That was the beginning of what happens next.
Yeah. I'll work with agencies and say, we do Win Without Pitching. We don't send out our proposals, we walk through it on a screen or in person. I'm like, okay, I'm sure that's a piece of it. No, that's not the entire
That's a piece
thing,
of it. It's a good piece of it too. I love hearing that we, you don't, as soon as you lob the proposal in over the fence, then you lose control. And the way I would have people think about this, sorry, I kind of cut you off there.
Nope, you're good. I might have cut you off, so we're good.
The way I have people think about this is it's a trade. You're creating a proposal for them in exchange for something. And the exchange is that they will assemble the decision makers and make a decision. So it's not an unreasonable request to say, absolutely, we'll put a proposal together for you and your partner. I just need the two of you to agree to review it with me in person. Let's set up a call is tomorrow or the day after tomorrow better for you?
Yeah. The other thing, I guess, is not directly tied to Win Without Pitching, but that I know millions of people leverage is your kind of kiss off email, or I forget what the exact naming of it is. But hey, haven't heard back from you. Safe to assume that we're not moving forward, or whatever. What is it exactly called that you referenced?
Well, it goes by many names. If you search winwithoutpitching.com for it, I think it's called the $1 Million Email, but we call it the takeaway email. And I wish I could give credit to the true origin of this. It was taught to me 25 years ago as a voicemail script. And I don't remember I remember who taught it to me. I don't remember or even know where she got it from. So somebody else is the author of this, and it was a voicemail script. But I'm getting a lot of credit for it online. I'm happy to take it, but I would be happy to redirect the credit to the proper author if anybody knows who it is.
Yeah, I've used it many times. I know a lot of people that have, and I've directed clients to it and friends over the years. So it's super valuable. I'm curious, in your kind of projection of what you hope people will take away from the 4 conversations, like not just in their work, but in how they approach client relationships. What do you expect that could be?
I would hope people take away from it that the sale really is a series of conversations. And when it ceases to be so, then that's when things start to go wrong. When you go into presentation mode, you start building decks, you go into convince mode. That's when you wreck the dynamics of an otherwise kind of healthy, two-way, open conversation. I always say to our clients, you're an excellent communicator. You would not get to where you are in your career if that were not true. And you're almost certainly an expert conversationalist. But something happens to us, almost all of us, when the domain of that conversation moves into sales. We become somebody else. We feel like we have to be brilliant. We can't make a mistake. We can't be human. We have to always be smiling and nodding yes. I'm not exactly sure where all this comes from. A few different theories on it. But it's just the oddest thing. You lose your ability to converse like a normal person when the stakes are you selling something to somebody. It's just the oddest thing. So if I could do one thing for my clients, it would be just to reach into them and pull out everything they think they know about what it means to sell. And then if salesperson U disappears, then expert you will step into the void and show up. And now all you need is a model, a set of frameworks for expert you to do your expert thing. If you're a coach, you should see selling as a coachable moment. If you're a consultant, you should see, or an advisor of any kind, you should see the sale as an advisory moment. You're not giving your thinking away for free. You're behaving as the advisor who will show up in the engagement. So this salesperson this second persona that we adopt, either because it's been trained into us or because we've inferred from all the bad selling practices that we've been on the buying end of, we infer that that's how sales should be done.
Over the past few years, sales, engagements, discoveries have happened more on Zoom than probably ever before. Do you see that these conversations are harder to have, or easier to have, or more fluid in person than they are on digital platforms?
I think Zoom sales calls are fantastic because you get to look people in the eyes. So it's better than a phone call. And I also think it's because everybody understands that most of these conversations are recorded now. I record all my Zoom calls by default, unless somebody asks about it or asks me to turn it off. It's just I don't even think to ask. I don't think it's just my default. And so if you are recording and those in your firm are recording their sales conversations, then you can go back and review those conversations. Our coaches do that for some of our clients too.
So for an agency that wants to kind of shift away from the way they're doing it now, free pitching, under pitching, crappy RFPs, and I know that's a long journey to get to a better place, but what's that first mindset change or first tactical change that you'd recommend they start heading down?
The mindset change, I'm going to quote Oren Klaff, who wrote a great book, the opposite of my book. It's called Pitch Anything.
Okay.
And somebody suggested it to me years ago, and I thought, I'm the win without pitching guy. I'm not reading a book called Pitch Anything. And then I started reading it on Amazon. I thought, oh, this is really well done. And his context for pitching is different. It's raising money. He's got, I don't know if he's the originator of this idea, and I borrow some of his language with attribution in the book, The Four Conversations, and cite him in our training. This idea of who is the prize in the relationship. So his line, I am the prize, and we borrowed that language. I am the expert, I am the prize. As Klaff points out, in any kind of social interaction, there are, each party brings kind of a view, what he calls a frame, to the conversation. And I'll generalize and say there are only two frames in a sales conversation. One is, I am the expert, I am the prize. And the other is, you are the client and you have the money, therefore you are the prize. And what Klaff points out is these frames, they don't play nice at the end of the interaction. One frame destroys the other, and you both share a frame. You both basically agree on the roles and the dynamics of the relationship. So if you think about what I modeled off the top of the call, these two different inbound inquiries, where in the first one, the client sees themselves as the prize, and you probably do too. In the second one, the client sees you as the prize, and you should see yourself as the prize here.
Yeah.
So that's mindset wise, that's the first thing that needs to happen. If you do not recognize and value your own expertise, then you cannot expect your clients to as well. So if you value it, show up in the sale without overplaying this idea. Show up in the sale as somebody who recognizes and values their own expertise.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's too many people that show up kind of like in the desperation of need another client, need another whatever, and that comes through. And so, yeah, in that case, absolutely, the client is the prize, and the agency's willing to do whatever it takes to win that over.
Back to the creative world context and away from Klaff's of fundraising and venture capital, trying to raise money for a startup. In our world, any pitch communicates to the client that they are the prize. Any pitch. So, this win without pitching, it's built right into the name of the business and the name of the first book.
Yeah.
You cannot be the expert if you're pitching. You just cannot.
Yeah, I love that. You can't. Looking ahead, where do you see the biggest opportunities for creative agencies, experts, advisors, I guess, in the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh, it's such a tricky time right now. We've got basically a software recession, the whole ZERP era, VC hitmaker model funding technology, and particularly software startups, that's frozen like a block of ice.
Yep.
Those days may never return, and then we've got this massive disruption called AI, add in offshoring, the AI and economic uncertainty with political craziness all over the world. It's a tough time for creative firms right now. I'm constantly in contact, like every day, with my friends who also serve this space, other advisors, many of whom you would know. And I cannot tell you what a year from now looks like.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying to people is, and this is more David Baker's domain of financial advice, is you need to have your overhead low and make sure you can survive. I mean, there's some firms that are thriving out there, and that's fantastic. There's just something about the nature of the work that they're doing or the audience that they're serving where they're insulated from this. but largely speaking, and I get more data points every day. Largely speaking, there's a lot of struggle out there, and I could not begin to tell you what a year from now looks like. Just, I have no idea. So in times of massive uncertainty, get your costs down. And when you see an opportunity, you go for it, but avoid existential risk. And I'm not a very conservative person by nature, but right now in this environment, surviving is the new winning.
Yeah, get your costs down, build up your cash reserves, extend your days till zero, far beyond what you typically would have.
Yeah.
Widen the net, widen the funnel, whatever you want to call it, and look for new opportunities.
You got it.
Yeah. I want to wrap up with a couple random rapid fire questions for you. The first is, if you had to rename your agency based on your last meal, what would it be called?
Well, I don't own an agency, so
Your
last meal.
Your consultancy.
Bacon and eggs.
Canadian bacon?
Nope.
If you weren't doing what you do now, and you kind of alluded to it, not building furniture, but what would you be doing?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
I would probably be doing something local in the community, small remote community I live in.
Yeah.
And I probably wouldn't be doing it for too long. I think there's an itch I'd like to scratch. I might own a cocktail bar.
Nice. Okay. Do you have a name and a brand sitting on a shelf somewhere waiting to
The Hoary Marmot.
Say it again?
The Hoary Marmot.
Okay. That sounds just perfectly Canadian. Yeah.
Those from Western Canada will know it. Others will not.
Finally, if you could eliminate one task from running your business, what would it be?
Oh, the nightmare that is the governmental compliance of accounting.
Yeah. I imagine it's different.
Flat tax for everyone. Oh, it drives me crazy. The percentage of resources of this business that go to financial compliance drives me crazy.
Yep. I think all of us face that, different governments, different countries, nonsense. But yeah. Blair, again, I am super, super grateful for you joining me, humbled by this opportunity to spend some time with you. We could also just chalk this up as a, what do you call it? This is me applying for the position of 3 Bobs, if that ever opens up. David, so.
No, but one of the Bobs might need to be replaced at some point, so we'll put you on that list.
Put me on the short list.
Yeah.
Really, I appreciate your time. Appreciate you sharing your expertise. Grab the not so new book anymore, The 4 Conversations, A New Model for Selling Expertise. As always, grab one of the older books as well, because they're always relevant, always timely, and game-changing for agencies. So thank you again.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks again for tuning in to Agency Bytes. If you know someone with expert knowledge on a topic that agency owners would love to hear about, go to agencyoutsight.com/podcast-guest and nominate them.